Hello and welcome to today's video. Today I'm looking at a range of nibs from Kanwrite. Kanwrite is an Indian pen company. They make super affordable pens and they make a huge range of nibs to go with them. They often say that there's like 30 nib options available for some pens. And that's across a range of steel nibs that are silver colored or gold colored or two-tone, and you've got everything from extra finer needle points through to triple broads and flex and stubs and all those kinds of things. So I got two pens from Kanwrite. I got the Desire here and I got the Heritage here. I'll show them very quickly in a minute. They're not the focus necessarily of the video today. I have 10 nibs I am looking at today. Now, both of these pens use a number 6 size nib. They are not interchangeable, however. The Desire, which is this pen here, uses a number 6 nib and a plastic feed. And then the Heritage here uses, once again, a number 6 size nib, but with an ebonite feed, and the housings don't match. The Heritage here is a piston filler, and the Desire is a cartridge converter pen. So they are very different pens, but they both use number 6 size steel nibs from Kanwrite, the same Kanwrite nibs, just in different housings. I've done a page where I've written with all 10 of the nibs I have, and I've done the same writing, all with Waterman Serenity Blue. And I've done a little bit of writing and then like a couple of lines to give a sense of the difference in the lines. So I'm going to talk through these now. And then I'm going to talk a little bit more about the flex nib options. So we'll start with the very finest, which is the Kanwrite needlepoint nib. I had this in the Heritage model, so with the ebonite feed. This is a very, very fine nib, but it feels ever so slightly architect-y to me, just ever so slightly. And if we look at these lines, you might see that the across lines feel just ever so slightly wider than the down strokes. So very, very slightly architect kind of grind, but it writes very, very nicely. Next, we have the extra fine, which I had in the Desire model, and it's not super fine. It is extra fine, but the difference between, say, the extra fine and the fine here is kind of not that exaggerated. But the extra fine, once again, wrote very smoothly, but slightly on the drier side. And they get kind of wetter as they go along. The fine there from the Heritage model is probably one of my favorites of all the nibs I got here. The feeling of this nib on the page, it's very smooth. It's got a lovely flow. I enjoyed that nib quite a lot. And as you can see, that extra fine and the fine there, these two along here, there's not a huge difference in the line width, but they're quite uniform in terms of their across stroke and their up and down stroke. Next, we have the medium nib here, once again, the Desire model, so the silver one. We're starting to get a little bit more line width here and a little bit wetter flow. It's a nice nib. It's a very simple nib. These are relatively stiff nibs. They are not flexy. They are stiff, but they are smooth, and they, generally speaking, across the board, are reliable and have good flow. The broad nib is one I like a lot. I generally like medium to broad nibs, and this isn't a super broad. I've got mediums that are certainly wider than this, but it's got a nice consistent line, and you can see there in the way that the ink has written a good consistent flow. And then we get the triple broad nib. So this nib, I'll show a photo of the tipping of this nib here as well, is so cool. It really lays down a heck of a lot of ink. Controlling that actually was an issue on this small grid paper, and I tried to keep everything within. This is the Rhodia 5x5 grid paper, and I tried to keep everything within that. And it's tough because it is a big broad nib, and you get a lot of you're getting sheen and stuff on the ink as well because of the amount of ink it's actually putting down on the page. But really lovely, big broad strokes there. Then we get a couple of interesting nibs. We've got the Kanwrite Broad Architect and the Kanwrite broad stub. Now, I love an architect nib and a stub nib. I find that an architect nib for a left-handed writer actually performs in a similar way to how a stub nib writes for a right-handed writer. And all these are done, of course, by me as a left-handed writer. But you can see if you look at the stub and the architect here together, these two here, the architect has the narrow downstrokes and the wider crossstrokes. The stub here has the wider downstrokes and the narrower crossstrokes. To highlight the point I'm making, I actually have a highlighter here. So if we're treating that as like the nib tip, if a right-handed writer is writing with a stub nib, let's say putting a flat, surface down, that's the kind of angle you get. So it runs kind of that way. If a left-handed writer is writing with a stub nib, we get that kind of angle. Now, that doesn't make a difference necessarily, except for when it's hard to see, but it's the upstroke, say, on those where you get the more narrow stroke, as opposed to it all sort of being just a little bit more flat and across the line with a stub nib. Whereas if a left-handed user is using an architect nib, so where the nib kind of has a profile that runs that way, we end up getting the same angle on the page as the right-handed stub user, so that there's that narrow upstroke that you kind of get with the right-handed stub. So that is why I personally, as a left-handed writer, enjoy architect nibs. I'm going to make a little bit of a video about that as well. But the Kanwrite architect here is really nice. It's not a super broad difference, but it is noticeable, as is the difference in the stub, very noticeable. And they both write beautifully, very smoothly, very nicely. And I have both of those there for the Desire model of pen. Okay, now we get into the Flex Nib, which is what a lot of people are really interested in, is Flex Nibs in general at the moment. And I have the Flex Nibs on these two pens now. What I've done is I've just done a writing sample with 0 pressure with each one. And that's the one with the Desire and the Heritage. And these are the fine Flex Nibs, but they are slightly different. Then what I've done is a tiny little bit of sort of basic flex writing to give you an idea that this is what it does. So what I'm going to do now is write with these two nibs. I'm going to start with 0 pressure. So this is I'll just put Desire Flex. With 0 pressure, and then work up to a bit of pressure just to see sort of what we can get. So the line variation isn't massive. I'd say it goes from, a fairly good extra fine through to broad, double broad, but it does keep up quite well. And there's very little railroading. It doesn't take a huge amount of pressure. It just kind of gets to a point, and then that's as far as it goes. So that's the Desire Model 1. These are both steel Flex nibs. And we've got shall I just show you the two nibs, next to each other, because it is rather interesting. So you can see they are slightly different. The one on the Heritage model here has sort of cut out wings on the side. That's the gold one on the left there. And then the standard Kanwrite Flex nib is fairly straight. Both have a extended tine split. And I said, both of these, well, the Desire has a plastic feed and the Heritage there has an ebonite feed. So they are slightly different nibs. So here we have the, hard start there, Heritage Flex. So I'll do the same thing here. So once again, without wanting to push the nib beyond its sort of comfort level, we go from something around the fine to extra fine here, through to probably closer to the triple broad from the standard one. It's a good line variation. And both of these keep up pretty well. Like if I'll try and do it faster. Like, not an issue at all there. A lot of pens, particularly in this sort of price range and this style of pen. I've got the design one here again. Like the Railroad, but these keep up really, really well. The feeds on these pens are great. As I said, on the standard nibs, the flow and the feeling of those nibs is really lovely on the page. So these are very, very nice. And what makes them really interesting is that these pens, the Desire model here, for instance, this one retails for around $12 American. Now, different nibs will cost different amounts. This is, as I said, a standard cartridge converter pen. It comes with a threaded converter, number 6 size nib, screw cap, all of those kinds of things. And this is the Crystal Royal Blue version. This one has the plain plastic feed. And then the Heritage model, as I said here, retails for around $27 US. Has gold trim and silver trim and a bunch of different colors. This is the Heritage Dual Tone Amber Black Cap. So it's got a piston filling mechanism, ebonite feed, all of that kind of stuff. Really affordable pens and a really large range of nibs. And you can see here the Flex nibs, they do perform quite well. The Heritage Flex has a bit more flex in it, but both keep up really, really well with the feeds. And then if we look at those other nibs again, you know, there's a huge range of nib sizes available from the needle point through extra fine, fine, medium, broad, triple broad, broad architect, broad stub, and then of course the Flex nibs we've looked at. I hope you found this video interesting, and I hope it inspires you to check out brands like Kanwrite, and I'll link to the Kanwrite, the website for this down below. There's a great range of colors of these pens. There's a great range of nibs available, and the prices, as I said, are absolutely wonderful. So even if the nib you want doesn't come on the pen, there's a range of nibs you can buy separately from them. So it's really worth looking at. It's a brand of nib that I've tried a couple of them in the past on different pens and always found them to be very serviceable, very reliable and consistent, and you know, smooth. And these are no exception. Like some of that triple broad and the medium, that fine particularly, I think is absolutely beautiful. So thank you for watching. A big thank you to Kanwrite for joining me on this video to show their range of their nibs and a couple of their pens. Thank you for watching, and yeah, get in touch if you'd like to support the channel. I'd love to hear from you. In the meantime, enjoy your pens, enjoy writing, and I'll talk to you soon.